Michael Bender here from the Christian Left blog. Sometimes we get into economics on this blog. This is one of those occasions. A question for Locke and George, that's John Locke and Henry George. Is land really a finite resource? Getting heavy here. So John Locke wrote that when private property is carved out of the commons, everyone else should be compensated. Henry George and his followers propose a 100% annual land value tax every year, to compensate non-owners with an annual subsidy, with many breaking even, the wealthy paying more and giving them an interest to sell to tenants, or an incentive to sell to tenants, and providing all social and welfare costs necessary for the poor. All of this is based on the following assumption. Land is a fixed resource. Is this true? Was it ever true? My grandfather had a small farm and a feed store in Kent, Washington. My mother was raised there, and she got married in the local Catholic Church. She had converted when she met my father. She went back there for her 50th high school reunion with my father in the 1990s. The farm no longer existed. There was a suburb where the farm used to be. She and my father could not have found it if they tried. And they had no rights to it because it had been too long since the farm had been abandoned or sold. My then wife and I went to Ireland on our honeymoon. We visited the ruin of her grandfather's farmhouse and farm. When he left for America, he sold the house and land to John, his cousin. A neighbor showed us the ruin, and then we went and visited John's grandson, also named John Connor. Yeah, I know, John Connor. Come with me if you want to live. Coincidence. The land where the cattle was grown was partly open meadow and part caravan or mobile home park. We did not inquire whether the tenants were travelers or summer renters. It was no longer Foley land. It was Connor land. Years ago, I looked at Google Earth to check in on the caravan park. The caravan park and presumably John had moved up the road to the other side of town. The location had better access to Dingle Bay and newer infrastructure for both permanent and seasonal travelers and tourists. A housing development was located where the old family farm used to be. I don't know about the ruin. It looked like it had been preserved. I'd have to call Sean O'Shea, who was the neighbor. John Locke had a good payday when he moved. My grandfather did not, as he abandoned his land, either selling it or losing it, years before the property was developed again, so there was no payday for the Allen family, even though the Connor family got a payday, we're sure. Whomever the lot was sold to surely got paid. The Allen farm was gone. The Foley ruin may not have been still there. I could not tell from the satellite picture, although it looked like it was there. Again, I've repeated myself because I got ahead of myself with the comments. Oh well. My great-grandfather's farm was visited by my parents. This is great-grandfather Bedner. Gravestones, modernized, were at the farm site, and the farmhouse was still standing. It was a gray wooden thing, although it was so gray it looked like it was metal. And the farm of course, wasn't being used. At some point, someone will eventually have to buy and destroy the house and land, and either disinter the graves and move them, or dig down and find there are no remains to move. That's usually the case after 100 years. My paternal grandparents bought a house during World War I. No, it was World War II. It was a duplex, and they turned it into a single-family home. After my parents were married, my mother moved in while my father was working as a test engineer someplace in the country. My aunt and another uncle, who was quadriplegic, lived there as well. So yeah, there were there were a few people there. My mother soon joined my father full time, and my uncle bought the half lot next door and built to build a garage to protect his car and his boat from the Minnesota winter. For one summer, after my siblings and I were all born, we went and stayed there. That's 5 kids in 7 years. My father, was being transferred, and he didn't know about unemployment, so we moved in, because we had to live someplace. My aunt had gotten married and moved out, and my Uncle Bobby and grandfather had passed. A house that held 6 people when my mother lived there, and held 2 when we brought 7 in. After we left, the family house was a haven for stray grandchildren during the summers, and for my family when they visited. I often visited. I hitchhiked from Iowa to Minnesota. I'm sure my mother didn't like that, but I enjoyed it. It was fun. When my uncle got married and moved out, my elderly grandmother, who was 93 at the time, was moved into a nursing home because my grandfather couldn't check on her and be there at night, although he, so it was, and in the morning, so, and she was getting more infirm anyway. She would have gone. So to qualify for Medicaid, the assets were sold off, as was my uncle's garage. I don't know if he got the garage or not. And a small house was jacked up over the garage, creating a new address. The house was made a duplex again, and it's probably home to students at nearby Bethany College, which is a Lutheran school that's up the hill, and whose property bordered the alley behind the family home. One large lot, which housed 2 people, was turned into homes for 3 households. The yards on 6th Street, which is the street that was on, were big enough to be split in half. They were terraced, so you could elevate the back a little more, be a bigger terrace for the whole block, and you could even buy a portion of the forest and dig into it. That's owned by the college, and you create 7th Street, which is in some places, but you'd extend 7th Street. If the Midwest were not declining in population, it would be a reasonable investment, provided a developer existed to take the risk. In all 4 cases, land was literally destroyed and created anew. So this thing that land is a fixed resource is wrong. It can be created, and it has been. The landscape of each ancient farm or house was or will soon be destroyed and become unrecognizable. The earth was or will be moved. The equipment is that's the earth on the site, is called an earth mover. That's kind of a key to understanding how the earth is moved. It's not fixed. A new use was created, and the person who developed the site earned a profit from doing so. So it is most likely that the land's sold for nowhere near what it was resold for to make housing. It can be argued that the land that was sold was abandoned and given over to salvage. This is part of the human life cycle. The only real issue is how to compensate those who live on the land that is abandoned for salvage, in other words, renters. In Alexandria, public housing and private housing were sold to developers. For private housing, those selling property were likely unaware that once their home was demolished, it would become expensive condos. For most of these projects, townhouses now stand with more families on the land than before the land was sold. And of course, the city sold the land, or the federal government or the developer, whoever operated the public housing, gave the land over, sold it to the developers. In Montgomery County, there's a section of land served by a private road. Down the street, there was a development put up without regard for the nearby landholders, who were descended from families of newly freed slaves, which had been held for more than a century. Nice houses, but no road. They had a private road, which is something people have. In fact, every road is a private road until it is sold or donated, actually, to the county. I'm sure they've worked this out, but because there's been no news coverage, I hope the landholders got reasonable access and compensation for their trouble, because they certainly got abused by the process. And it was probably racial, and might have even been deliberate. You never know with the housing community. There are some people who are not of good character as far as race is concerned. The task of government is to make sure that when development happens, those who are inconvenienced are compensated, including tenants or public housing clients. In Alexandria, a high-rise apartment was built or bought for those families to live in. It's not a bad building. I'd been in there for a birthday party for one of my daughter's friends. The parking's a nightmare, but it's which is a good thing because it bespeaks of prosperity. In other words, people have cars. It's good to have a car. Should there be a clawback for landlords who do not demand a high enough sales price when selling to developers? Landholders, not landlords. Possibly. If they were not aware what the property would bring, almost certainly. Adequate compensation would lessen the holdout problem, where an entire neighborhood agrees to relocate, but a small number or a single landowner blocks the project, either out of stubbornness or avarice. The law needs some work in this. In Israel, the land where Zionists occupied was sold fair and square. The problem was that the tenants who had a sense of ownership of where they lived got nothing. Decades of warfare resulted. The landowners got their due. Whoever was on the actual deed with the Ottoman Empire. The people on the land did not get something, and shooting commenced. The issue in many cases involves tenants and to some extent landholders. Is not the physical development, but instead the human development. A society which does the latter adequately, including teaching financial literacy, the easier the former is to accomplish. In other words, you'll make a better deal if you know about finances. Human ownership is also an issue. In capitalism, most workers do not own the entire product of their labor. With education, they are better off, but those who purchase their time are often much better off. Social democracy is an attempt to ameliorate this problem, but in reality it produces a better cage rather than ownership. State socialism simply trades one group of connected owners for another. In Russia, Putin would have thugged his way into a nice Black Sea estate in either the old Soviet or the current autocracy. Or the czardom, He would have just killed the czar and become the czar. Cooperative socialism, which my great-grandfather Silas Allen helped establish at Land O'Lakes, is a better answer. If land ownership, human resource development, work, consumption, and finance are united in the same hands and democratically administered, there is no exploitation. Land could be held in trust, with housing owned by either the cooperative for younger workers and families, or the industrial worker, or the individual worker. So you'd have apartments. The cooperative would pay any property taxes, including what Georgists call land rent, to compensate anyone living in the trust property who is not part of the cooperative, and/or provide them the same public services that members receive, or human services, I should say. Preferential hiring would also be included in such a deal, including remedial or advanced education to the extent desired or required by new members. The real reason land value tax and human development is needed, and especially equal employment and housing opportunity laws with criminal penalties, is that the people want the right to pick their neighbors. That is not a liberty right. That is simply pure racism. The nature of land itself is changing. Not only are we destroying old land or use and creating entirely new land from what was salvaged, we can also turn this video into an end because I've run out of time. Thank you.